A strong storm covered the mountains with snow. Spruce branches swayed in the wind, covered with a thin layer of snow. War raged between Scylla, the Rattus tribe, and the Helms family who ruled Isabella. It was rumored that the bloodshed began when the Helmses found a huge cache of gold in Rattus. The blindingly white snow was quickly stained with a scarlet liquid. From that day on, many warriors died. The Scylla tribe, which numbered only 30,000 people, was quickly defeated by Isabella's troops. The events quickly moved to Rattus in the year 372. The exhausted bodies of the inhabitants trembled from cold and fear. A thin, clawed hand held a blade that was covered in human blood. The woman fell down and begged for mercy. Soon the blade received a new portion of blood. The inhabitants trembled, looking at the brunette, and begged for mercy. One of the men raised his head and asked why they were killing their tribe. He reminded them that they had fought bravely on the battlefield. Before his death, the blonde said that even after their death they would not forgive the bastards from Isabella. The war was merciless. Women and children were killed. Grabbing the resisting man's head with force, the brunette ordered him to bow before him. The tree-colored robe stretched across the snowy wasteland. Grabbing another man by the face, the brutal killer asked what he was staring at. The snow-white snow was rapidly filled with blood, and the white-skinned hands acquired a scarlet color. The killer did not feel a drop of regret, but a grin appeared on his face. The scarlet liquid quickly flowed from the lifeless bodies, whose warmth was quickly taken away by the gusty, fierce winter wind. The people continued to beg for mercy, assuring that they were ready to surrender. Elder Ratissa was ready to have their lands, gold and honor taken away, and he assured that they needed nothing. The people wondered if the old man had really lost his mind, since he was kneeling before the invaders. With tears in his eyes, the brunette asked them to keep quiet and assured them that they had already lost. The brunette watched the frightened and exhausted from hunger and cold inhabitants with coldness. The guy licked the blood from his hand, while cold-bloodedness was visible in his eyes. The chief explained that in addition to the jewels, he was ready to give away his only daughter. The elder reported that the young beauty now belonged entirely to the conqueror. Raising her head, the girl asked in surprise whether she really was just property for exchange for her father. There was no fear in the girl's eyes, and she was ready to accept her fate. The brunette looked with disdain at the elder, who was willing to give everything for his worthless soul. The conqueror laughed and asked what made the girl so dear. Approaching the young lady, the man ordered her to raise her head. The conqueror explained that he wanted to look at her sweet face. A clawed hand covered in blood grabbed the girl tightly by the neck. The brunette grinned and noticed that she was very beautiful. The invader agreed to spare their worthless lives in exchange for land, gold, and the chieftain's daughter. The elder remained tied up in the blood-stained snow, fluffy white snowflakes swirling around the man. The events moved to Isabella in the year 373. The daughter of the tribe has married Prince Seth Helms. The couple was blessed by the queen, but no one could call it a happy marriage. The girl's snow-white hand lay uncertainly in Seth's clawed palm. The boy took the comb. He said with sadness in his voice that when he was a child he asked his father for a doll. Then the parent hit the boy in the face, and he insisted that this toy was only intended for girls. Despite the brutal beatings, the boy still stole the doll from the girl and locked the toy in an oak chest. The brunette maintained the toy's appearance every day by carefully combing its hair. One day the father found that toy and tore it into many small pieces. Seth lowered his head as if admitting his guilt. Smiling, the guy claimed that he had never had dolls before. The prince gently combed his chosen one's hair, after which he undressed the girl naked. The brunette noticed that she was flawless. After 3 ill-fated years, the girl took her daughter Isla to the field. The child was only 11 months old at the time. The brunette asked the man to take the baby far, far away, where the prince would not be able to reach her. The man asked to go with him because the child needed a mother. He warned that if Isla stayed, her bloodthirsty husband would kill her. The girl lowered her eyes without answering. The savior realized that she had already made her choice. Jumping onto a black horse, the man spurred the animal, and for some reason it flew far beyond the horizon. The blonde said goodbye to the lady forever. Isla was brought to the kingdom against her will and lived with a monster. The girl sincerely hoped that one day someone would pull her out of this ill-fated house. She sincerely hoped that one day she would be able to return to her daughter in this monotonous adventure of life. At this point, Isola couldn't hope that her daughter would always be happy. The girl slowly stomped in the monster's arms, becoming more and more like him. The prince mercilessly killed his wife, turning her face into a shapeless mass. Not paying attention to the lifeless body of his wife, the monster ordered to find the child. The fire quickly consumed the majestic castle. Bowing, the knight reported that they were looking for, but the man and His Majesty's daughter had escaped. The brunette took out a small medallion and slowly lowered it down his long claws. The conqueror placed the once valuable thing at his feet and pulled it apart. Amidst the shards of glass on the floor, a photograph of the princess was visible. The monster had taken out Isola's heart, which was still beating. The prince's silhouette was terribly bent, as if he were an ordinary shadow. The brunette ordered to find the child and promised to personally finish it. One day, the promised land was given by the ocean, the most powerful of the gods. The Almighty provided his children with a serene life. Hundreds of miles from the beautiful place, the city took thousands of lives and all the dark times that seemed to have no end. But here laughter was everywhere, and if you just put your hands in the water and whistle Scolia Sequila, any child could catch the freshest fish. Every resident could bring a fish with its scales sparkling in the sun to the table. The boys hummed a melody as they fished their fresh dinner out of the water. They knew they had to enjoy life because it was too short and time would spare no one. Nearby, a girl was rinsing laundry, her strong hands squeezing the last of the water out of the fabric. But then suddenly the fair-haired boy caught the drowned man by the leg. The child began to drag the body to the shore. His eyes widened in surprise and fear. A dark-haired, curly-haired girl with light eyes stood on the shore. She held a basket full of small fish in her hands. Ela was already 20 years old then. The huge ship was tossed from side to side by the threatening waves. Water poured mercilessly onto the ship's deck, causing the vessel to be thrown from side to side. Flashes of lightning tore through the soothing sound of the rain. On May 13th, the ship left Isabella for Verdigris. On the 5th day of the journey, the ship encountered a terrible storm. The bad weather began suddenly, causing the goods on board to quickly sink along with the entire crew. Storm waves mercilessly flooded the ship's deck, causing the ship to rapidly sink. The cause of the crew's death was not the raging ocean, but an uninvited guest who had been driven out by his fellow tribesmen. The creature leapt onto the deck, clawed feet scraping the wooden floor. Despite the crew's many attempts to save their lives, it was all in vain. The seawater mixed with the brackish blood quite quickly. The outcast will lead to the fall of one of the most powerful kingdoms. The monster quickly tore apart the people on the already sinking ship. The ship's masts sank under the water. Soon splashes of water were heard near the place of God, which were on the lifeless body of the drowned man. The boy with blonde hair brought his find to the shore. The kid reported that the dead man had washed up on the shore. Unfortunately, it was the children who discovered the lifeless body. A crowd of onlookers gathered around the dead man. Someone in the crowd asked if there had been any missing persons reports. After a negative response, someone suggested that it was a suicide. The locals began to talk among themselves that the body clearly did not belong to one of the locals. An elderly woman suggested that the body could have been carried by the current from Verdrig. The girl noted that the neighboring settlement was dozens of nautical miles away. The brunette threw up her hands. She asked how long it had taken the drowned man to get to them. The girl insisted that after such a long time, the hair and nails would have rotted long ago. She noted that the body looked whole and unharmed. The brunette said that she had never seen such a beautiful drowned man before. The girl noticed that the fish had not touched the body, and the skin was not wrinkled at all. She asked the witnesses if the body had washed up on their shores. Smiling, the brunette noted that the stranger was charming and looked like he was just taking a nap. The brunette, actively splitting wood, asked the elderly man again about cremations. The girl asked again if this was only true for witches, and she wondered why they couldn't throw the dead man back into the water. Cold sweat appeared on the man's face, and he asked his daughter to watch her tongue. The father reminded them that the ocean gave them a lot, sometimes even things they didn't ask for. The gray-haired man explained that sometimes the majestic ocean sent them not a fish, but a devil incarnate. Soon the funeral pyre was ready. The brunette said she would go get the corpse. The father strictly asked the girl not to do anything stupid. With a sly grin, the girl agreed with her father's opinion. A man from the crowd asked not to continue the ceremony and suggested arranging a merger with the ocean for the drowned man. One of the men snorted that this ritual was only for locals. The brunette explained that before cremation the guy's soul must return to God, otherwise he will wander in the underworld. The man asked the elder if he could perform the ritual. The brunette noticed that her father's hands were shaking violently. The girl claimed that in such a state the elder could not perform this ritual and asked to grant her this honor. Taking her father's hand, the brunette asked him to let her help. She promised to always be on his side. The old man was overcome by a memory. In it, the girl was outraged that she would have to live in a luxury cage all her life and considered it disgusting. The man thought for a moment and nodded, closing his brown eyes. After a minute of trance, he answered affirmatively. The sea waves were calmly beating against the brick pier. People gathered around the corpse, which was lying on a wooden bench. The brunette took a small scalpel in her hands and hung over the corpse, exposing the upper part of the body. The girl confidently made the first cut. The blade easily cut the skin on the temple, revealing dead flesh. Several instruments opened the dead man's mouth, revealing fangs as sharp as daggers. The scalpel in the girl's hands was removing the skin from the face. Soon the brunette removed the skin, exposing every muscle of the dead man's facial expression. The girl said that they were taking his personality so that he could cross the ocean. The chieftain's daughter tore out the dead man's eyeballs with a flick of her wrist. She said she was doing it so he wouldn't see what was hurting him. With a skillful movement of the scalpel, the girl cut open the corpse's stomach and removed its internal organs, so that it would be easier to go to God. Having taken the heart out of the entire mass, the girl said that they were returning it to the deceased so that it would be with him until the end of the world. Already at sunset, the bones were burning in the funeral pyre. The fire slowly but inexorably incinerated the remains of the flesh. The glare of the setting sun played briskly on the surface of the seawater. A lot of seaweed washed up on the shore. The boys called out to Eric to come and help them. The boy looked uncertainly at the sea surface, but still did not dare to take a step. The brunette insisted that grabbing a dead man by the leg was not the end of the world. Another boy suggested that his friend was trying to get out of work. The boys were collecting the golden algae quite quickly. Laughing, the blonde asked his friend if he had seen Eric's face. The boy joked that their friend was very scared. The brunette asked his friend to hold the basket. He explained that he wanted to show him something. The guy took one of the seaweeds and asked his friend to imagine that it was the leg of a corpse. And he was Eric. The guy, dangling his hand in the water, grabbed the object. He screamed and laughed. The friend asked how Eric felt. One of the adults ordered the brunette to stop teasing the boy, as they were hurting him to tears. The blonde asked his friend to come over and help them. The boys, holding hands, began to take out the golden seaweed, throw it back and take it out again, in order to show that there was no danger lurking in the water. After a few discarded seaweeds, the brunette grabbed something else. Fear appeared in Eric's eyes. Turning around, the boy saw a man's head floating on the surface. There was horror in the boy's eyes. The paw touched his soft baby face. Soon, due to the lack of air, bubbles began to come out from under the water. The creature decided to finish the kid off quickly and grabbed him tightly by the neck with its clawed paw. The sharp, dagger-like claws pierced the boy, coloring the seawater scarlet. A few moments later, the boy's eyes glazed over and the last of the air began to come out of his mouth. The islanders knew that the love story was unbreakable, and it didn't matter how it started. Fear shone in Eric's eyes, but he did not dare to come forward to help. The setting sun was burning out, foreshadowing that soon the promised land would be plunged into darkness. Realizing that he couldn't save his friend, the blonde emerged from the water, breathing heavily. The creature decided not to let the guy go and dragged him into the sea depths. For a few moments, the area in the sea was stained with blood. A dark clawed paw burst out of the water, spraying scarlet liquid around itself. Dark hair played in the wind, while a smile played on the creature's face. With a creepy grin, the monster looked at Eric sitting on the shore. On that fateful day, it was born from the depths of the sea. The fireplace crackled comfortably in the small wooden houses. Mothers were waiting for their sons to return from fishing by the hearth. The delicious aroma of soup was spreading through the cozy house. The women were hoping to see their sons home soon, with or without fish. At first glance, everything was going as usual. None of the mothers could even imagine that one day their children would not return home. Lifeless, bloodless bodies lay on the shore or floated in the sea. The monster watched the fading sunset. The brunette turned around and looked at the boy, whose body was trembling and whose eyes were filled with horror. If the city's residents had known that something like this could happen, they would have told their children from the cradle that they shouldn't go to the sea after sunset. With a flick of the wrist, a razor-sharp claw tore the boy's head off. There was fear in Eric's eyes, and scarlet liquid oozed from the stump of his neck. The creatures wanted the locals to bow their heads to the ground. Eric's eyes soon became glassy, filled with horror and fear. The creature stuck its clawed paw into the depths of the sea. The monster pulled out a similar body and whispered for it to wake up. Many creatures with green and pale skin began to burst out of the sea. The guy's head remained lying on the warm stones. As she left the house, the woman called Eric, saying that it was time for him to go home. The caring mother scanned the rocky shore with her eyes. The lifeless body of her son lay not far from her home. Seeing the head, the woman ran, wondering if it was her beloved son. The woman looked with horror at the small head that lay in a pool of its own blood. The mother tried to run to her son, but a pale-faced monster moved towards her. The chieftain's daughter turned around, hearing a roar that was barely audible on the gust of wind. The sound was barely audible, and in that hour of terrible events, everything became a nightmare in an instant. The monster peered through the window, looking into the eyes of one of the women who was peacefully preparing a hearty meal for her family. Wheezing heavily, the monster stuck his hand through the open window, trying to drag the housewife away. The woman jumped back from the window rather quickly and looked at the creature with horror. On all fours, like animals, it was hurrying towards the open door. To their regret, the residents of the house did not have time to slam and bolt the door. The creature rushed towards them, not seeing any obstacles in its path. Having jumped into the house, the creatures began to mercilessly tear human bodies apart. Sometimes it seemed as if people were lighter than flies for them. The stone floors of the house were quickly covered in blood. The creatures knocked people off their feet and sank their razor-sharp claws into helpless bodies. The house was filled with screams of horror and panic. The heavy breathing of terrible creatures from the depths of the sea could be heard. Soon, only one woman remained in the once cozy house. She watched in horror as her closest people were torn apart and eaten by these creatures. The housewife tried with all her might to close the door and save at least her life. The woman realized that her household was no longer destined to escape. The heavy wooden door began to give in to the creature's attempts to break in. The creatures quickly shattered the brunette's only defense into many small pieces. The creature grabbed the woman by the leg and dragged her towards itself. The brunette screamed in pain and fear. The creature from the depths of the sea was tearing her alive. People tried to hide in panic, but some brave men even tried to fight the terrible creatures with improvised means. The bloodthirsty creatures chased people, because they could not get enough after being in the sea depths for a long time. The chieftain's daughter killed the creatures with a deft movement of her hand. The girl skillfully cut the creatures' throats, causing them to wheeze terribly. The sea waves, painted in a reddish color, were breaking on the shore. The creature stretched its clawed paw towards the peacefully sleeping city. Drops of water slowly dripped from the monster's muscular body back into the sea depths. Cremation could have saved the city from the invasion of monsters, but the soul easily left the body. He remembered his torn-out eyes in his hands, and he tried to remember who it was. He wanted to find those who did this to him. The monster clearly remembered the face of a young brunette with curly hair and light eyes. He could see her features through her half-open eyes. The brunette sat on the coastal rocks, which were covered in blood. The waves crashed noisily against the coastal rocks and covered the perfect muscular body of the resurrected monster with thousands of splashes. The blood of the creature that the girl had killed slowly flowed onto the floor and splashed onto the walls. The brunette quickly threw the creature aside, trying to save the woman who was part of her people. The housewife held her neck and writhed in pain. Soon, unintelligible wheezing began to come from the woman's mouth. The chieftain's daughter asked the woman not to move and asked to be allowed to examine the wound. The bite marks were quickly spreading across the poor woman's neck. Thick foam and wheezing that resembled a roar began to flow from the brunette's mouth. The infection quickly spread throughout the housewife's body, covering her face, neck, and entire body with a red mesh of vessels. Despite significant injuries, the creature rushed at the girl, baring its fangs and drooling. The gray-bearded man grabbed an axe and ordered Isla to bend down closer to the ground. The axe flew right over the brunette's head. The elder quickly plunged the axe into the creature's neck. The creature tried to resist. It tore the tool from the leader's strong hands with force, but soon the elder overpowered it, and having knocked the monster to the floor, he cut off its head. The brunette turned to the elder, who nailed the creature to the wall and cut it into small pieces with a knife. Looking into the creature's mouth, the girl assumed with horror that it was a vampire. The man assured that the creature was a half-blooded vampire and reminded that it was half-human. The chieftain pinned the monster to the wall with the butt of his axe. He no longer moved. Blood was rapidly pouring onto the small town's paved streets. The remaining people were running for their lives. The infection was spreading throughout the woman's body, becoming increasingly dangerous. One of the elderly residents was missing an arm. The streets were filled with frantic cries of pain and suffering. Vampires mercilessly tore people apart or made them like themselves. The people were helpless against the creatures. The vampires quickly overran the city. Grabbing small stones, the girl began to bravely throw them at the uninvited guests. The elder's daughter did everything possible to save the people. The man tossed Isla one of his toolkits. The girl expertly picked up the knife and began quickly removing the creature's skin. The girl said that she was taking his identity so that he could cross the ocean. Splashes of infected blood spilled onto the walls. Despite the serious injuries, the vampire had no intention of stopping. The girl continued to perform the ritual despite all the horrors that were happening in the city. People with pitchforks and torches tried to defend themselves. The elder grabbed the monster in a net and struck its heart. The fishing net began to slowly tear apart, but fortunately the knife hit right in the heart. The girl hesitantly extended her hand, and he explained that the creature had not yet given up the ghost but was merely immobilized. The elder explained that it was impossible for human weapons to stop a vampire's heart. The place of God and the inhabitants that were in it were quickly covered with hot tongues of flame. The monsters surrounded the people, but they fought with all their might. One of the men, waving a sharp pitchfork, insisted that there were 2 ways up and suggested that they needed to go there. The elder ordered to drag everything that could be used as a weapon. Looking around, the man called Isla. The girl was kneeling next to the wounded housewife, who was still breathing. Putting his hand on his daughter's shoulder, the man said that there was nothing they could do to help her. The elder explained that the half-vampire's poison would spread throughout the body in a couple of hours and kill the woman. Breaking through the crowd of creatures, the elder asked not to let the brunette be bitten. The gray-haired old man said that in case of danger, it would be better to hit all the creatures with a knife or other sharp object. The girl worriedly asked what would happen to the elder. He asked Isla to take the wounded to a safe place. The blonde called the elder and asked him to be careful. With a lightning-fast movement, the vampire tried to pounce on the 2. The creature knocked the elder off his feet, causing him to howl in pain. The old man's legs quickly became like a shapeless piece of meat. The bones cracked more and more with each passing second. The brunette stabbed her hand into the monster's face with fury. The vampire's face cracked and the remains of blood and brain came out. The gray eyes remained just as cold and determined. Isla pierced the monster with a dagger, causing it to squeal in pain. The girl's hands were quickly covered in the creature's blood. Taking the axe, she continued to beat the creature furiously. Soon, only a bloody stain remained from the face and predatory teeth. Isla did not stop beating the monster with the weapon no matter what. Bloody splashes quickly rose into the air, painting everything around in burgundy. There was some kind of madness in the girl's eyes. The elder ran up to her and asked the brunette to stop. He explained that she could have gone mad. Fury was visible in the girl's gray eyes. Holding her tightly to himself, the elder told the girl that she should not do that. The man assured her that everything was fine with him. He began to gently pull the girl away from the vampire, whose body was crushed by a heavy axe. Hugging the brunette, the elder gently said her name and insisted that everything would be fine. Despite all the elder's efforts, she still held the bloody axe in her weak hands. There was sadness on Ila's face, and tears were almost welling up in her dull gray eyes. The girl tried her best to control herself. The brunette asked the elder for forgiveness because his leg was injured by the creature. The men's faces were covered in beads of cold sweat. He insisted that the girl shouldn't have done this and claimed that he was fine. She bandaged the elder's leg. The man walked unsteadily, limping badly. Drops of blood ran down the injured limb. One of the survivors ordered Isla to take the old man to safety. The boy advised her not to drop her weapon again. The children opened the door hesitantly and asked their father what was going on. The man, holding a torch in his hand, ordered his children to stay at home. A huge crowd of people were walking along the streets of the city. Many pushed each other, trying to increase their chances of survival. The brunette, clutching the axe tightly in her hand, asked the elder to follow her. Isla explained that he needed to rest. The old man left many scarlet stains on the asphalt. The creature suddenly noticed the girl among the crowd. Despite everything, she calmed her panic and gave the old man a chance to survive. Surprise flashed in the vampire's blue eyes. He recognized his daughter, lost many years ago. Throwing back her severed head, the creature quickly walked towards the brunette. The vampire threw the old man aside as if the junk was of no use. With his last strength, the man asked Isla to run and save at least his own life. A malicious smile was visible on the vampire's face. He took the girl by the face, looking closely into her faded gray eyes. The brunette was trying with all her might to lift the heavy, bloody axe. With one swing, the brunette's clawed paws broke the weapon. The axe handle flew off to the side, but there was no fear in the silver eyes. The girl realized with panic that her plan had not worked on this creature. The dim light from the flames played on the vampire's face, The brunette's amethyst eyes stared at the girl. Without giving in to her emotions, the brunette realized that there was a fire behind her. Isla realized that this was her chance. She grabbed the handle of the axe and scooped up some of the fire's contents. With all her might, the girl sent the hot coals into the creature's grinning face. The girl realized that she needed to take the elder to a safe place, which was located far from the city. Having recovered a little from the injuries inflicted by the fire, the vampire grabbed the brunette's hand tightly. The creature twisted the girl's arm behind her back, immobilizing her. Ayla tried her best to dodge, but the vampire bit through her flesh. With tears in his eyes, the elder said the girl's name. The man asked to let her go. The vampire mercilessly stepped on the old man's foot, breaking the limb once again. Drops of blood slowly trickled down from the clawed leg. Breaking into a scream, she asked how the creature dared to touch the elder. The vampire approached the girl and knocked her to the ground. The brunette bit her neck, causing unbearable pain. The bloodsucker slowly sated his thirst with her juices. The elder begged the vampire not to do this and to let the girl go. Isla beat the creature on its massive legs with all her strength. The girl insisted that she could no longer breathe. Indistinguishable wheezing could be heard from her throat. The bloodsucker, holding the girl's body, asked if they could now talk to the elder. The body of the brave young lady dangled lifelessly in the bloodsucker's arms, as if she were a rag doll. Standing on a deserted field, the girl doubted that the queen would like her. The brunette explained that Her Majesty had some kind of unkind look. The brunette assumed that it could have been because of her clothes. The girl reassured herself that she had chosen the best of her clothes. The elder asked his daughter not to speak of the queen that way. She said she hated the place and wanted to return to Ratis. Raising her hand, the girl insisted that they had lost, and that she had been brought to this damned place like merchandise. The girl stood in the middle of a luxurious field and proudly spread her arms. She caught every gust of wind, trying to feel at least a little better. Isla was amazed by the beauty of the local views. The girl realized that she would have to live in a cage of luxury for the rest of her life. She, like her mother, considered it something disgusting. The man asked her not to say that and promised to always be on the girl's side. Isola's body lay on the street of the city, which was strewn with human panic, with the smell of burning and blood. The bloodsucker pressed the man to himself, trying to strangle him. The monster was surprised that he had managed to become an elder. The vampire noticed that he had almost forgotten the man's face, since 20 years had already passed. A smile formed on the creature's face. The elder was writhing in pain because his leg was torn off. The vampire was pressing on the wound, not letting the man die so easily. The brunette explained that it didn't matter to him why the girl was still alive, or how the elder managed to get her to safety. The bloodsucker asked the gray-haired man if the girl was his daughter. With a mad smile, the old man explained that the monster was not destined to know this, since he himself did not know it. The queen did not share this information with him. The elder said that on the day the king killed his wife, he buried her secret. On that terrible day, the bloodsucker lifted his wife up and said that he was sorry, because he had already managed to like her face. The vampires quickly took away the girl's bones and said goodbye to her forever. The king rolled his eyes and said he remembered that. Looking at the man, the vampire assumed that his blood would tell him the right answer. The elder reminded him that the vampire had been unable to read anything except the girl. The man asked if the bloodsucker thought his blood would tell him anything. Pointing to the fragile body of the brave girl, the king asked if he should take care of his ex-wife's daughter. Trying to wriggle out of it, the elder ordered that he dare not do so. The bloodsucker grinned and said that he wanted to and dared to do it. He tried his best to keep the vampire from touching Isla. The brunette grinned and said that he would not touch the girl or her fingers. The elder begged Isla to wake up. Snow-white fangs flashed in the night gloom. The pale-faced girl lay silently on the neatly laid paving stones. The flames were rapidly approaching the lifeless body. A call to wake up was heard. The monsters felt the taste of the girl's blood. The bloodsucker slowly spun her fragile body on the record player. The girl tried to hold on to the surface, but her nails treacherously broke off. The brunette still couldn't open her eyes while in the monster's mind. Thin threads wrapped around her hands, helping her to rise up a little. The naked body was pulled upward and enveloped in some incomprehensible slimy mass. Soon, the incomprehensible substance began to turn into something that resembled clothing. Hyla stood up abruptly, feeling the lightness in her graceful body. She felt better than ever. The girl parted her silky curly hair, revealing her beautiful face. The girl's personality began to unravel its emotions into many small threads. The clones were getting closer and closer to Isla. The creatures became more and more numerous, and they began to cause their mistress unbearable pain. The brunette screamed as her snow-white skin was torn apart, revealing her flesh. Scarlet blood gushed from the limb torn off by the creatures. The brunette tried to escape from the monsters, who began to quickly pull out her teeth. The clones took the scarlet spears and began to approach the girl and thrust the sharp objects into her flesh. Blood flooded her consciousness, causing unbearable pain. The girl's legs began to tremble violently from the frantic pain. Isla was slowly turning into the same monster that her own father had been. The girl's clones killed her human essence and dipped their hands in the scarlet substance. The creatures removed the heart from the bloody mass with the vessels still intact. The heart began to rapidly grow flesh, creating a new version of Isla. The brunette's arms began to bend into an unnatural position. The elder looked in horror at the girl he had raised all his life, as if she were his daughter. Having come to her senses, the brunette opened her blood-red eyes. She heard a sound that echoed in her head. The girl's teeth began to slowly fall out. The old man was trying his best to reach Isla. The girl stood on the blood-stained pavement. The man tried in vain to shout to the one with whom he had spent many years. A voice in her head ordered the girl to dance for her master. Her father called her the most darling princess. A voice in her head ordered the brunette to immerse her entire body in a shade of red, because it was the king's favorite color. With light movements, Isla approached the man, who was trembling with fear. The girl stretched her clawed fingers towards his face. The poor guy tried with all his might to reach the knife that lay on the ground. Clutching the flesh, the girl began to slowly drink the juices of the one she had recently protected. Her clawed fingers quickly dug into the flesh of the defenseless man. A voice in her head told her to dance until her legs were torn apart and her sweat merged with her blood. The girl tore apart the locals and dragged the city. The streams of flame did not stop her. All humanity was destroyed when she was exposed to the cursed poison from the bite of a pure-blood vampire. She loomed over the children, trembling with fear. Her pale face was broken into a bloody grin. She easily broke down the rather strong oak door. The girl grabbed the little boy's face with her clawed paws. The boy asked why Isla's eyes were blood-red. For a few moments she regained her consciousness. The brunette stopped and thought about who she really was. The woman pulled her children aside, hoping to protect those she held dear. The creatures within Isla tore the memories of those she held dear to shreds. The brunette's sharp claws ripped the unfortunate mother's face open. The children rushed in horror to the woman who was bleeding. Isla began to quickly stretch her hands to the children and the woman, wanting to deal with them. "Father, protect your children," thrust the knife into the creature's back. The vampire froze for a few moments. The gray clothes began to rapidly turn red. The man, despite his serious injuries, held the weapon tightly in his hands. The blonde ordered his family to run and save their lives. The girl stretched out her hands to the local's face. Shards of glass and bone, along with splashes of blood, flew across the cold stone walls. Panic in the city grew, and the number of flaming objects increased. People crowded the streets, putting each other in danger. The vampire let go of the elder's face. The bloodsucker abandoned the man, leaving him to die a slow and painful death, watching as his city rapidly perished. The princess danced with the bloodsucker with a smile. The king held his daughter tightly by the waist and twirled her in a graceful dance. The vampire awakened her true nature. A smile crept across the king's face. For a few moments, when she saw the elder, her mind was freed from the fog. Her father continued to whisper to her to dance until her eyes darkened and her smile turned to tears. As if hypnotized, Isla continued to dance on the remains of people once close to her. The flames quickly devoured the city, which was considered a place of God. Breathing heavily, the old man wrapped his stump with bandages, which had already become covered in scarlet liquid. With great effort, the man rose from the ground. The elder looked around and saw a spear in the hands of the infected man. The old man tried to compensate for the weapon with the absence of his leg. The man ordered the vampire to release Isla. The king whispered in his daughter's ear the order to kill the gray-haired old man. There was regret in the girl's eyes, but she was unable to resist. The brunette's consciousness was rapidly fading. One cold winter day, the man met her gaze. An exhausted body lay among dry, snow-covered branches. The man was breathing heavily, his arms spread out on the snow-white carpet. Someone touched him. The girl worriedly informed him that he would freeze to death if he slept in that place. The brown-haired man opened his eyes in a warm hut. His thin body was covered with a huge, soft and warm blanket. A fire was dancing in the middle of the yurt. The girl was surprised to notice that he had woken up and pulled the blanket higher so that her companion could warm up. The man's eyes were clouded with grief. The girl reported that he was miraculously still alive. The guest said that his first child died of malaria, and he sold the second so as not to starve. To his regret, the blonde stopped hearing her. The money that the man was able to save still could not save his wife from the Grim Reaper. Before her death, the brunette reported that she had heard that Ratis was covered in snow, and explained that, according to the stories, the snow was like salt, only cold. The woman said that she had never seen this wonderful sight. She hoped that when they had money, the whole family would be able to go there. The rain outside the window sounded very heavy, and she was just looking for a quiet place to die peacefully. The man came back to life after all. The sun's rays played on the snow-covered tree branches. Wrapped in warm clothes, the man left the house. The rescuer asked why he was not inside. The girl said it was very cold outside. The brunette assured that he was perfectly fine. The man sincerely thanked Isola Bella. The rescuer reported that the brunette could simply call her Isola. The man realized that the girl would have been the same age as his daughter if he had not sold her. The horse proudly strode its hooves across the snowy valleys. The girl reminded him that she had asked the blonde not to follow her. The bride asked if he should stay in the settlement. That day, Isola Bella was taken to Isabella for her engagement to Prince Seth. The man asked to be allowed to walk with her. He realized that if he hadn't sold her, she might have lived a little longer. The elder leaned on his spear, limping toward the brunette. The girl writhed, clutching the hem of her dress tightly with her clawed hands. Seth ordered his daughter to kill the old man immediately. The girl, without the slightest hesitation, pounced on him, trying to tear him apart. The man's eyes darkened, but he was still conscious. The elder tried his best to fight Isola. The men were afraid to harm her, but they knew that she had become a half-vampire and could not die. The old man knew that a stake through the heart would only paralyze the girl. After asking Isola for forgiveness, he thrust the spear into her heart. Drops of blood quickly flowed down her chest. With her last strength, the brunette writhed, trying to devour the victim. The elder's ears were blocked by the brunette's furious scream. Blood and unintelligible wheezing gushed from her mouth with blade-sharp fangs. The man realized that he had missed and had not even immobilized the creature. He covered its mouth with his hand, pulled out the spear, and plunged the weapon into the flesh again. The elder knew he had to hit the heart. He wouldn't have another chance. Seth pushed his daughter away, trying to save her life. A massive clawed paw dug into the girl's face, and the king reminded her that he had ordered the elder to be killed. The bloodsucker was outraged that the girl had not carried out his order clearly and thoughtlessly. Isla looked at her father with dull gray eyes. Her human essence was trying to escape the vile clutches of thousands of clones. Seth whispered to the brunette if she had heard him. Grabbing the girl by the leg, he threw her into the flames where the body of one of the vampires was burning. The brunette's face was distorted by terrible pain. The flames played on the girl's face. The fire was ready to quickly engulf the fragile body. Rushing to Isla, the elder shouted the vampire's name. The monster grabbed the old man's face tightly, pressing him to the ground. Seth said that the man was not worthy of calling him by his name and ordered him to calm down. Amethyst's eyes were calmer than ever. The bloodsucker said that he wanted the man to live a little longer. The girl's limbs were breaking unnaturally, trying to get rid of the frantic pain. The bloodsucker, holding the old man by the neck, ordered him not to dare die quickly. Isla, having gotten rid of the smoldering coals on her body, jumped to her feet. The father gently ran his clawed paw along the brunette's waist. Seth grinned and assured that everything would be like the good old days. During a dizzying dance, he ripped open the girl's stomach, causing her to scream in excruciating pain. The clones continued to whisper for the girl to kill the old man and spill a lot of blood. Ela firmly grabbed the asphalt with her clawed paws. The elder asked if the creature needed him to die in such a painful way. Smiling, the vampire said that half-breeds did not die such a quick death. The creature said that it didn't matter how badly the half-breed was injured, because as long as their heart wasn't injured, they would rise again and again. The vampire pierced his palm with his finger. The scarlet liquid began to slowly flow down the tip of the spear. Seth said that only the blood of a true vampire could calm the half-breeds. The king handed the man the spear and offered to kill the girl. Hela pounced on the man, his heart pounding. He knew what he had to do, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. The bloodsucker asked if the elder knew what happened when half-breeds rebelled. Seth tried to hide his gleeful grin. The bloodsucker said that non-purebred vampires were madly thirsty for blood after rebirth. Biting into the man's hand, Isla furiously tore his snow-white shirt and dug her teeth into the flesh. The fabric quickly began to turn red. Looking at the spear, the elder realized that he was quickly losing his composure. The man quickly threw the brunette off himself. He realized that his consciousness was rapidly becoming cloudy, and his body was already at the limit of its capabilities. The elder was holding the wound tightly with his hand. The man couldn't understand why at that moment he was remembering that damn day when Isola ordered him to follow her. Walking through fields with many herbs, the girl explained that she really wanted to return to the forest, which was covered with snow. The old man realized that because of his feelings, he always protected Isla instead of his own daughter. The man realized that he could not kill Isla because he treated her like his own daughter and protected her like his own. He hugged the girl tightly, realizing that he couldn't do it. The man recalled his first meeting with the girl's mother, who found an opportunity to help him. The elder remembered the endless expanse of the winter forest. He realized that he could not die just like that. The girl lost control and tore the man's clothes to shreds. Blood was gushing from his back and his heart was already in the creature's clutches. Since the brunette was born of a half-breed, she was different from the others. Isla was tightly squeezing the old man's heart. With a light movement of his hand, Seth tore out the heart of one of his subordinates and bloodthirstily devoured it. The king calmly watched the girl, who was clutching the treat tightly in her hands. The bloodsucker realized that there was no point in killing the girl at this moment, and decided to give her a chance to live a little longer. The daughter turned to the vampire, looking into his amethyst eyes. Seth quickly plunged the spear with the handle straight into her heart. Her heart began to beat wildly and tears rolled from her blood-red eyes. The bats flew into the air, flapping their nasty wings. The gentleman held his own in his arms, successfully immobilizing it with a stake through the heart. The werewolves soon stopped flapping their wings and began to fall rapidly downwards. The creature's wings were pierced by sharp arrows. The small bodies of the werewolves fell to the ground, and Seth realized he had missed someone. The bat flapped its wings furiously, and by dawn it had reached another city. The dawn sun painted the clouds in bright hues. The huge city was surrounded by seas and mountains. The light played with glare on the sea surface. The ship slowly moved along the strait. The vampire actively headed towards the city of Isabella. People were actively crowding near the merchants' shops. Someone was urging the workers not to stand in the passage and to be more careful. The townspeople were reaching out their hands to the fresh carcasses of birds. The woman noticed that the price of geese had increased significantly. The girls looked at the new collections of jewelry boxes with admiration. The blonde assured that she wanted to buy something new. The merchant claimed that the jewelry was made in a modern design based on the palace fashion. Opening the mahogany lid, the merchant presented the girl with a new collection. The buyer assumed that the gems from verdigris were the most beautiful. Smiling helpfully, the blonde noted that the beautiful milady had a keen eye. People were discussing how big the queen's birthday ceremony would be. A large, lifelike statue of His Majesty stood near the luxurious White House. The blonde walked measuredly along the streets of the city. The guy asked if all the beautiful flowers were intended for the palace. The blonde man passed the butler. He accidentally looked inside the slightly open basket. Flies were circling around the small basket. The insects were hungry for a feast on the flesh of someone's face. The dead man's glassy eyes stared into space. The blonde asked Louis to carefully close the basket. The man apologized and closed the basket tightly. The blonde asked if the servant had shown him this on purpose. The servant assured him that it had happened quite by accident. The gentleman snapped back. Did he think he would believe him? The man explained that he had no right to dissuade him. Walking slowly down the luxurious corridor, the man turned to Mr. Garden. The blonde looked back and asked what had happened. Quickly walking away down the long, bright corridor, the servant replied that it was nothing important. The man explained that the queen had expected it. The servant wished the boy luck. The guy dropped to one knee before the queen and greeted Her Highness. The man presented the queen with a gift in the form of a werewolf chained to a plate. The woman quickly plunged a fork and knife into the creature, trembling with fear. The snow-white plate quickly became covered with scarlet liquid. The blonde greedily licked the blood from the cutlery. The queen was glad that Rupert had finally arrived. The boy's blue eyes were cast down. Warm sea waves splashed against the small ship's hull. Many vampire bodies that had fallen in battle lay on top of each other in it. The sea waves crashed against the coastal rocks. Birds flew over the sea trying to catch fish. Seth carried the body of his daughter. Isla dangled in his arms, offering no resistance. Rupert stood and watched as the queen enjoyed her meal. Rivulets of blood pouring from the animal's body. Blood accompanied all the events that happened to the animal. Flashes of images slowly filled the queen's body. A woman saw a village on a distant island being attacked by half-vampires. The woman knew that those half-vampires couldn't have done something like that. The queen realized that this was the work of her nephew, who had been exiled from Isabella many years ago. The woman asked what the brunette was doing on that island. The queen assumed that the thirst for blood had led the guy to want to find an easy target for slaughter. The blonde realized that he had left Palacris, although he was under her watchful eye. The woman understood that this one would not have gone so far for simple murders. A certain fear flashed in the queen's eyes. The blonde saw in her visions a girl pierced by a bloody spear. The woman realized that she knew this face well, and realized that her nephew had found the girl. The queen put down the cutlery after she had sorted everything out. The woman said that her birthday was coming soon. The blonde claimed that she would be 111 years old. The aroma of a freshly cooked dish reached the woman. The blonde realized that the lords would offer her gifts, but her own nephew would never remember his old lady. Rupert assumed that the lady was talking about his lordship Prince Seth. The boy reminded him that 15 years ago the prince had killed countless innocent people. The blonde recalled that on that day, Her Highness expelled the prince from Isabella. He shuddered at the memory of the sea of blood and the mountains of innocent corpses. Rupert said there had been numerous attempts on the prince's life, but none had been successful. The blonde hesitantly asked if Her Highness wanted Prince Seth to send her a birthday present. The woman coldly replied that the boy had understood her correctly. The blonde explained that she was an elderly woman who needed the love of her children and grandchildren. The queen reported that she had sent a man to Palacris, where Seth was an honored guest of Lord Waldo. The woman had sent a request for a gift. The blonde shared that her nephew returned her head along with a birthday wish. The guy realized what kind of head he was talking about. He touched his neck out of fear and nausea. The queen explained that she wanted Rupert to go to Palacris and ask for another gift for her. The blonde explained that if Her Highness wanted his head, she could have it right now. The guy asked what all the fuss was about. The blonde coldly snapped that his head was of no value to her since he was not a half-breed. The queen explained that her nephew had recently returned with a half-blood. Her Majesty had ordered several half-bloods to be brought to her. The events are transferred to the castle of Lord Waldo. The prince broke his sharp fangs. The tips of his teeth fell to the floor. The man enjoyed his reflection in the mirror while naked. He was slightly covered by a black veil. Someone called out to the brunette. Bursting into the room, the girl asked when he had managed to return home. She scolded him for not visiting her right away. The brunette asked where he had been for such a long time. The girl said that she had been waiting in anticipation of the gift. She was the only daughter of Lord Palacris. Lamia quickly walked towards the brunette. Pressing herself against the prince, the girl said that she missed him to death. Smiling, the brunette said that he was changing clothes. Milady was surprised that he was embarrassed by her. Lamia assured that she would not do anything to him and hugged the guy tightly by his thin waist. The brunette reminded the bloodsucker that he promised to marry her when she turned 18. Lamia reminded them that she was already an adult and asked why they were not married yet. The vampire replied that he wanted to get married, but Lord Waldo could not approve of their relationship. The girl explained that her father was against it only because the boy did not want to change his last name to Crooks. The brunette asked if the Helm's name was so important to him. Seth reminded him that even though he had been exiled from Isabella, he was still the eldest Helm's son. The boy explained that his family had ruled Isabella for centuries, and his family name was very important. With fury in her eyes, Lamia asked again if he still wanted to marry her. The brunette assumed that the prince already had another girl, and therefore did not want to get married. The lord's daughter asked who this girl of easy virtue was. The girl promised to kill her rival in the most painful way. Lamia asked why her lover was silent. The prince tenderly kissed her on the cheek. The brunette froze in surprise, enjoying this wonderful moment. Seth asked the girl to calm down, and explained that she was the love of his life. The bloodsucker explained that the girl was the reason he lived. The werewolf asked how he could cheat on her. The brunette said that these words from her precious lips truly broke his heart. Amethyst eyes sparkled in the semi-darkness of the room. Seth asked his beloved not to be sad, and explained that he did not deserve her love. The prince asked the brunette to be patient a little longer, and promised to make her the happiest woman on earth. A clawed paw gently stroked the girl's face. Unable to contain her emotions, Lamia jumped into his arms and pressed herself tightly against his muscular body. The guy supported her butt with his large hand. Seth rolled his eyes at the tenderness. The girl whispered that she knew he loved her more than anything in the world. Birds were screaming through the small window. Ela had not yet recovered from her return from the bloody battlefield. The girl was shackled with massive chains on her hands. The brunette hung in shackles with her head bowed. The sea waves crashed against the rocky shore, creating a lot of snow-white foam. Small tufts of moss grew on large boulders. The barrel slowly floated towards the rocky shores. The seaweed swayed in the slight current. The girl in the snow-white dress dived into the depths of the sea. The brunette held a small knife in her hands. Having reached the very bottom of Isla, first quickly pick off small mollusks. The water tried to push the fragile body to the surface. Taking a couple of shells from the seabed, the girl began to quickly float to the surface, wanting to gulp some air. Having thrown a few shellfish into the floating barrel, the girl returned to the shore. The white thin fabric outlined her graceful silhouette. The brunette wrung out her silky hair, trying to get rid of the remaining water. After she changed her clothes and headed to town, she heard the news that a corpse had washed up on the shore. The girl resolutely performed the ritual, returning the dead man's heart, which was supposed to be with him until the end of the world. Entering the hut, Isla did not see the man and asked where he was. Approaching the elder, the girl asked why he was sitting on the floor. The man's eyes were cloudy and reflected some kind of silent sadness. The girl admitted that she already thought that she had lost him. She hugged the elder tightly, enjoying these moments spent together. Isla suggested that the man go home and helped him up. Memories rolled down the brunette's pale cheeks like tears. The girl realized what she had done on that ill-fated night. The beating of her heart echoed in her ears, and drops of hot tears quickly rolled down her face, falling onto the cold stone floor. Looking around, Isla tried to comprehend where she was. A small amount of light was shining through the small window, illuminating the gloomy room. Isla tried to stand up but felt helpless. She tugged at the shackles that bound her wrists, trying to free herself. The sound of heavy, rusty chains filled the room. The brunette tried to remember what had happened and how she had ended up in that damned place. The girl's head was hurting badly. She perceived what had happened that ill-fated night as a terrible dream. The girl was sure that in her dream the sea had brought a corpse to the village, and she was holding a ceremony to put it to rest. Isla remembered creatures with red eyes. In the nightmare, the elder told her that the creatures were half-breed vampires. The girl tried to remember what happened after the half-breed vampires filled the city. Isla tried to remember where the elder had been. She still wanted to sincerely believe that it was a dream, usually a nightmare, and not a realistic nightmare. Seth walked confidently towards the ill-fated room. There were several knights standing near the door of the dungeon, guarding the entrance. The prince confidently inserted the key into the lock. Writhing in the shackles, the girl heard a distinct click. After the door swung open, the brunette realized that everything she remembered was not a nightmare. Tears quickly flowed from dull gray eyes. A small beam of light pulled the crying girl out of the darkness. Lamia was incredibly happy that her lover had finally arrived. Several strong guys informed the prisoner that dinner was ready. The girl did not stop crying, staring indifferently at the wall. Her thin shoulders were very stiff from the awkward position of her limbs. Seth informed the Lord that it was a great honor for him. Waldo, not believing his eyes, asked if it was really the prince standing in front of him. The man grinned and noticed that he looked perfectly fine. The fat carcass lay on the soft cushions of the sofa. The brunette asked what her father was talking about. Pressing herself tightly against the bloodsucker, she assured him that her beloved was perfectly fine. Her father noted that decent ladies should not press themselves against young men. The Lord asked if the guest had brought anything this time. The man said that he had heard that he had found red-eyed people here again. Waldo asked where those monsters had been. With confident steps, the prince showed his old friend the cage, which was overflowing with creatures. Half-breed vampires were trying to squeeze through the thick bars of their prison. The knight asked the Lord not to come too close. Lamia told her lover that she was scared. The Lord smiled and asked his nephew to repeat how an ordinary person could become a half-breed vampire. Waldo had a sly grin on his face and asked what made the creatures like that. The man knocked on the door and said he had brought Isla dinner. The worker sincerely hoped that she was hungry. The brown-haired man reminded his friend that they had been ordered not to contact the captive. The blonde asked his colleague to calm down and explained that he had simply brought the girl something to eat. The worker noticed that the captive was quite hungry. The blonde reminded that the master had ordered not to do this. The guard asked if his friend had really listened to Seth. The boy reminded him that he was a refugee from Isabella. The worker explained that he had no right to tell them what to do. The brown-haired man looked uncertainly at the thin legs of the captive. The worker was furious that Seth dared to keep the girl away from the eyes of Milady. The guy explained that if Milady found out, she wouldn't leave it like that. The blonde asked his friend what he was talking about. The guy called the brown-haired man a fool and explained that they had come for something ready-made, and he didn't dare refuse. The blonde asked his friend to stop all these discussions. The guy advised his friend to move if he was scared. The blonde placed the food on the floor in front of the girl and asked her not to cry. Ela continued to cry, realizing what she had done. Without stopping crying, the girl asked the sir to tell her where they were and why she was chained. The blonde asked her not to cry. Isla said that her house was in God's place and asked to take her there. Tears did not stop rolling from her eyes. Swallowing nervously, the blonde said that they were in Palakris. The man said he had never heard of God's place and insisted he could not help her. The worker explained that the girl did not need to return home. The blonde began to stretch his dirty hands towards the emaciated body. The girl recoiled, wondering if he had brought her to this damned place. Sitting down next to her, the worker explained that he hadn't done it. The blonde hoped that he could touch the girl dirty without prying eyes. Looking inside, the colleague advised the man to stop doing it. Turning around, the man ordered the bastard to get lost. Isla's body shook from the sharp sound of the doors opening. The blonde asked the girl not to be afraid and promised that he would not yell at her. The blonde promised to be gentle with her. The girl asked if he was telling the truth. The worker smiled and answered positively and reached for her lips. The man gently touched her lips and insisted that as long as the captive was obedient, everything would be fine. The worker kissed her lips tenderly, but soon his eyes widened in fear. The blonde begged the girl not to do this and to stop. He tried to tear away the beauty, who sank her sharp fangs into his lips. Hyla's eyes were filled with madness. She tasted blood and tore off a piece of flesh. The worker staggered back and fell to the floor of the dungeon. The girl spat out a piece of his tongue onto the stone floor. The brown-haired man quickly approached the door when he heard screams. The guy asked his friend what happened. Blood was slowly trickling down the captive's face. She looked at the insolent man with a predatory gaze. Indistinct sounds that hardly resembled speech were coming from the brown-haired man's mouth. His tongue was lying on the floor. The man, with tears in his eyes, tried to stop the bleeding. The blonde man began to convulse on the floor of the dungeon. The brown-haired man looked with fear at his colleague, who was convulsing on the cold, dirty stone floor of the prison cell. The man paid for his words and ill intentions, and shaking with pain, insulted the girl. The scarlet liquid quickly flowed down. Running up to his colleague, the guy asked what had happened. Hyla confidently promised to kill everyone. With a bloody grin, the brunette threatened to kill every freak who dared to touch her. The girl promised to remember each one's face and swore that she would skin them until their breathing stopped. Isla wondered if the man thought he had the right to touch her without paying a price. Bloody fangs flashed in the dim light of the dungeon. The girl's eyes began to turn blood red. She promised that after his death she would rip out every bone and feed them to the dogs. Isla swore by God that they had no idea what kind of torture awaited those who returned to her cage. The brunette hoped that it was a dream and prayed to God to wake up. The girl's heart was pounding wildly as if trying to break out of her chest. Bloody streaks remained on her face. The brown-haired man recoiled, seeing red eyes and realizing that the girl was a half-breed vampire. The poison quickly spread throughout the impudent man's body. Slowly backing away, the worker noticed that the girl was a beast. Witches are long gone, having been exterminated many years ago. In those days, public executions by burning at the stake or hanging were the norm. Women were quickly exterminated one by one. But after many victims, the law on witchcraft was repealed and people stopped hunting witches. The people did not understand who could destroy the harvest and bring famine upon them. The commoners blamed everything on the unfortunate women. The brunette fell to her knees and asked the Lord to listen to her. The woman tearfully began to tell the story of her family. The brunette claimed that after the unsuccessful harvest, her husband disappeared without a trace. Until that moment, she was sure that he had abandoned the family and started a new life. The woman claimed that the man then returned as if nothing had happened. The brunette said that she and her son were incredibly grateful because he became even stronger. The woman said that something was different about her wife, but she couldn't find this minor difference. Even though the man claimed to be hungry, he never ate her cooking. Until that moment, the brunette assumed that his tastes had changed. The next morning, people found the rotting corpse of their neighbor. People were surprised because earlier he looked quite healthy. Every night, one resident began to die in a strange way, and her husband became stronger. The unfortunate woman admitted that once she doubted, She was inclined to the version to blame him. One night, the brunette heard strange sounds coming from her son's bedroom. The woman said that before her eyes, under the blue twilight, her precious son died. The brunette swore that her husband was her only love, with crimson-red eyes. The woman was horrified to see him holding the lifeless body of his son, and her husband's mouth was filled with blood. At that moment, the woman ran to seek help from local residents. When she returned with the crowd, her husband was gone. In the following years, the number of people with red eyes increased. Vampires began to multiply like mice. The woman claimed that her husband was no longer human and had sold his soul to the devil. She concluded that he had become a servant of darkness. The brunette fell to her knees and begged the ruler to save her husband, since his soul was forever chained inside his mortal body. The woman prayed that he would suffer again. She begged the master that her husband's soul would rest in peace. My lord asked if the woman had given these monstrous people a name. Kneeling, the woman explained that she had already given these creatures a name. The brown-haired man asked the poor lady what their names were. The woman explained that half-breed vampires were half human, but the other half of their being was monstrous. Candle flames played on the walls. Seth extended his hand to his beloved. The creatures resembled the people who had been them before, but had sold their souls to the devil. The vampires hid among the innocent and drank their blood to sustain their own being. Lamia asked again how the creatures were born. Smiling, the prince asked if his lady had found these monstrous creatures cute. The girl's eyes were full of surprise, and she asked again. The bloodsucker asked if his beloved had ever dreamed of a perfect body. The vampire explained that the creature had red eyes like rubies, and they never got sick, and old age was not scary for them. Seth explained that vampires had a soul that was forever imprisoned until the end of time. The prince said that vampires remain human, but have a slightly different essence. The bloodsucker gently ran his clawed fingers over her cheek. For a few moments, the girl froze. Seth wondered if it was too small a price to sell her soul to the devil. The brunette's own heartbeat was pounding in her ears. She could feel his breath, so close. The Lord called out to the boy, noticing that he was hugging his daughter too tightly. The boy asked for forgiveness from the respected man. Lamia snapped at her father, noting that he was too annoying. The girl asked if her love considered half-breeds ugly. The Lord said that his daughter did not want to be a terrible freak like those creatures. She asked if the creatures would be publicly tortured and then executed. The worker slowly walked away from the girl, noticing that she was a monster. Blood slowly trickled down Ila's lips. The girl's heartbeat echoed in her ears. The brunette tried with all her might to reach the slowly dying pervert. Ila craved the liquid that flowed inside that pathetic body. The girl tore the bracelets apart with a light jerk of her hand. The links of the chain broke quite quickly from her slight effort. The guard quickly slammed the door and tried to keep the creature captive. The girl hit the metal door with all her might. The worker's ears heard the clanking of chains dragging along the floor as the captive moved. The brown-haired man looked uncertainly inside the cell. Ila was already enjoying the taste of the pervert's blood. She sank her razor-sharp teeth into his hand. She looked into the man's eyes with her ruby eyes. The brunette looked up from her meal for a few moments, seeing her new victim. The girl's heart began to pound wildly when she smelled the fresh flesh. Isla stuck her face out of a small window and tried to bite the worker. He shuddered in fear and headed down the stairs. The brown-haired man ran without looking back and begged to open the door. He tried to break the oak boards, tearing his nails until they bled. The worker begged for help, explaining that he saw a half-breed vampire. The man explained that if no one opened the door, he would die. Animal fear shone in his eyes. The brown-haired man could not understand why this was happening to him. Moonlight illuminated the small room in the dungeon. Wiping the streaks from her plump lips, the brunette tries to remember when she lost her composure. The bloody body lay in the middle of her cell, rapidly decomposing after the girl had introduced poison from her fangs. Ila took the hand that was bound with rotting flesh and knocked hesitantly on the huge iron door. She realized she heard someone breathing, but she couldn't figure out who it was. Isla wondered if it was the one who had been in this dungeon earlier. There was only silence in response. The brunette was clutching a small blade tightly in his hands. Isla reminded him that he had called her a half-vampire. The girl asked who these creatures were. The man was genuinely surprised that the girl did not know. The brown-haired man remarked that it was outrageous that monsters like her were in the same place with ordinary people. Running her clawed hand along the metal door, the girl insisted that she was not a monster. The worker recalls that next to her lay the corpse of the man who brought that food. The guy said that people like her not only drank human blood, but also made people like her. The worker recalled that the girl had turned his colleague into a stinking, disgusting mess. The brown-haired man claimed that such monsters should not exist. Isla began to furiously beat her hands on the door, claiming that she was not a monster. The brunette asked if the girl had tried to hurt herself. The girl wondered why she would do something like that. The worker said that half-breeds like her regenerate quickly, but an ordinary person cannot do that. The captive once again said that she was not a monster. Isla could hear her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The man asked her to prove it, and asked her to hurt herself intentionally. The worker assured her that if she was a normal person, her wounds would not heal quickly. The brunette realized that it would be stupid to mutilate herself intentionally. The girl knew that an open wound without proper treatment could become inflamed, especially in such a damp and smelly place next to a rotting corpse. Pulling herself together, the girl decided to make just a small scratch on her hand. She looked at her wrist and hoped that there would be no complications. Isla reminded herself that there was no clean or sharp object in the cell. Looking at her hands, she couldn't understand when her nails had grown so long. She grinned and made a small scratch on her forearm. The sharp nail tore the flesh quite easily. She dragged the nail along the length of her arm. Isla was surprised at how quickly her wounds healed. The girl was amazed that the nightmare that God had sent her was so realistic. The brunette felt pain from the nails entering her flesh. The girl was ready to vomit from the smell of rotting flesh nearby. She asked the Almighty why her scratch healed instantly. The girl wondered if her own eyes were deceiving her. The brunette assumed the wound wasn't deep enough. Falling to her knees, Isla dug her sharp nails into the flesh, tearing her arm until it bled. A few moments later, the wounds disappeared without leaving a trace. Staring at her hand, the brunette only said a drawn-out no. The girl again and again dug sharp claws into her flesh, after which it instantly tightened. The worker laughed and noted that her wounds instantly tightened. The man explained that she should understand what he was talking about. The interlocutor reminded her that she was a vile monster. Isla began pounding on the door with all her might, insisting that she was not a monster. Soon the metal began to yield to her efforts and bend. With a nervous laugh, the worker asked why she was angry. The noise died down for a few moments, causing the brown-haired man to freeze in anticipation. The girl grabbed the rotting body, which was emitting a terrible stench. Taking the corpse by the hands, she repeated that she was not a monster, and slammed her body against the door with all her might. Suddenly, Seth appeared in front of the girl. Without noticing it earlier, she hit the man with the corpse. Fear shone in the girl's eyes. The blonde reread his letter. The guy said he was Rupert Garden. Rupert wrote in the letter that the document was his last will and testament. The blonde wished for his physical body to be returned to Isabella. The blonde expressed a wish that his body would remain untouched, or at least that his heart would be buried on his native soil. The blonde man indicated that his personal research and documents would be sent to his family library. He wished that all his savings be donated to the Guaman University Student Fund. Archie asked not to give him papers to sign that he could wipe his ass with. The blonde told his friends that this was the will of a man who was on the brink of death every day. Archie remarked that if his friend had time to worry about death, it would be better to just die. The blonde snapped and asked how he could talk to his elders like that. The boy looked down and asked the sir for forgiveness. The boy said that the papers he used for the will were quite hard and not suitable for soft human bodies. The blonde explained that the procedure was inexpensive, but they could all afford it. Rupert insisted that using water was more economical and efficient. The green-haired boy asked if the gentleman had called him only to sign the death certificate. The boy sighed heavily and said that it was not a certificate. The blonde said that it didn't matter to him because he needed it. The guy thanked Archie for bringing the box to his office. The blonde looked at 2 syringes with bright blue and blood-red liquid. Rupert asked if he wanted to see what the medicine was. They walked over to the table where the tortured half-breed vampire lay. Isabella had rules to protect the lives and well-being of people. Unfortunately, none of the laws, rules, or morals protected half-breed vampires. They were treated like animals. The blonde explained that there was only one condition under which half-breeds could exist in Isabella. It was to be experimental subjects instead of humans. Noticing that the creatures were less significant than slaves, the guy said that when the creature was a man, his name was John. But now he is number 5. Rupert revealed that John had been sentenced to death for murder, rape, and robbery. The blonde revealed that the queen had allowed the man to be turned into a half-vampire for medical purposes. The boy explained that Dr. Ian had specifically given permission to use the number 5 on this special day. The blonde told his companion that the vampire's regeneration was faster than that of other half-breeds. Rupert said that the subject was ideal for research. Taking a syringe with a scarlet liquid, the blonde admitted that this would be the first time he would use it on a humanoid creature. The boy hoped that his drug would work as it should. Rupert brought the syringe to the creature. Number 5 yanked hysterically at the chains, making them jingle loudly. The blonde injected the contents of the syringe into the half-breed's neck. Archie assumed it was a rather painful procedure. The guy asked the blonde what was in the syringe. The scientist said that the solution of the blood of the bred vampire and mercury concentration is 1 to 10. Rupert said that this amount should be enough to immobilize the half-breed. The guy said that the creature was relaxed for the first time, and that it was the only deep sleep after a long time. The blonde opened the blood-red eyes of the half-vampire. Rupert explained that Dr. Ian had experimented extensively with this specimen. The guy shared that he planned to increase the blood content in the solution and see what happens. The experimenter poured another syringe into the limp body of the creature. Archie noticed that the subject had no reaction. The blonde asked his friend to wait with his conclusions, noticing that the skin where he had inserted the needle had become hard as a rock. The boy grabbed the muscle he was injecting the drug into. He tore out a chunk of the half-vampire's flesh. Rupert assumed the toxin had already reached the heart. The subject's body began to rapidly break apart, as if it were made of clay. The guy reported that the vampire was dead, as there were no signs of regeneration. The green-haired boy noticed that test subject number 5 looked serene. The blonde said he wanted to try another syringe, and the other suggested that he should wait for the next opportunity. The green-haired boy asked if their trip to Polacris was related to half-breed vampires. Seth pounced on the girl and pressed her firmly to the ground. Unable to bear it, the guard threw up right on the floor. Clutching the key tightly in his hand, the brown-haired man realized that a moment ago the man had been standing in front of him. Looking into the cell with the girl, the guard realized that the gentleman had disappeared. Isla continued to writhe in pain, still feeling a heavy hand on her throat. The vampire wondered if his daughter was so happy to see him that she burst into tears. The girl looked at her father with glassy eyes, from which hot drops of tears were pouring. The sound of the heartbeat echoed in the girl's ears. The brunette noticed that her uninvited guest was cold as a corpse, and it scared her a little. When her father deigned to let go of her neck, the girl began to cough violently and hysterically swallow air. Seth noticed that she was so scared that she couldn't move. The vampire was surprised that the girl's look changed so quickly. She looked at the hand with clawed fingers with indifference. Looking at the stranger's face, Ela realized that she had seen him somewhere before. To her regret, the brunette could not remember. But she felt sick. The girl asked who the guest of her dungeon was. Amethyst eyes sparkled in the semi-darkness. A strong tremor ran through the thin girl's body and she recoiled. He insisted that he was the only one asking questions in this cell. The girl noticed that the stranger had fangs as sharp as a blade in his mouth. The vampire looked at the rotting body in the middle of the cell with indifference. The prince was surprised that the girl could do this. Pointing his finger at the decaying body, the bloodsucker ordered the worker to clean up. Drops of cold sweat slowly rolled down the brown-haired man's face. The worker hurried to pull his colleague's body out of the cell. Tears slowly rolled down the guy's face as he looked at the gnawed body of his partner. The worker asked the dead man for forgiveness. Seth grinned and noticed that the girl looked very much like her mother.